On Saturday, October 7th, the terrorist organization Hamas launched a bloody and unprovoked attack on the nation of Israel, resulting in the death of 1,200 Israelis, including women and children, and among the dead are at least 22 Americans. Mike, this is a difficult question for us all, but what is the appropriate response for Israel and the United States?
Well, first of all, I think it's important to remember, or just to say, that our hearts and our thoughts and prayer, all of those things, we stand with Israel. We stand with those families who have lost their loved ones. I mean, it's horrible. It's horrific. The stories, the pictures continue to be devastating. And so I just think it's important for us to acknowledge that to start. I think Israel's response is to defend itself and to make sure that they can protect its citizens, and I think that's what it's doing. I think we in the United States have to be in a position to support them in that effort, and thus far it appears to be that's the case. The challenge we have, obviously, from a congressional perspective, is we still don't have leadership in a congressional area to be able to take action, to be able to make sure we have the resources. But at least to date, from what I've seen, the president, Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, that we are reacting accordingly and making sure resources exist for Israel to be able to take appropriate measures. And I think those are appropriate responses. The other thing I think that I've seen clearly, at least in our community and more broadly across the country, to the extent that I can capture that, is a significant outpouring of support for that approach, that people recognize that Israel was attacked unprovoked and needs to be able to respond, and are supportive of that approach.
Well, I mean, obviously the situation in the Middle East has been going on for decades. And Mark, Israel this time has announced that this is like it's 9/11, and they are going to take an aggressive defensive operation with the goal of annihilating Hamas threat once and for all. But let's remember that in 2014, Israel waged war in Gaza, sending troops into Gaza with the same desire of defeating Hamas. But they did that in response to rocket attacks. And the result was Hamas came back stronger. So is this goal of destroying Hamas achievable? And is that the right response?
Well, that remains to be seen. And obviously, that's Israel's it's their decision as an independent country to decide how to respond to that. I think it's important to look at the broader context, is that since 2014, a great deal of progress has been made with the Abraham Accords and accommodation with a number of countries, other countries in the Middle East, Arab countries in the Middle East. And a lot can be said about the suggestion that the timing of this was intended to scuttle those efforts to create a break between the Saudis that were having talks with Israel, and this was an effort by Iran to do that. So this is something that the Israelis need to navigate, but I think we need to be mindful of that broader context.
Thank you, Mark. So segue now, Mike, I'm always fascinated about how our leaders here in Maryland and Montgomery County are responding to this. Maryland Governor Moore told WJZ on Tuesday that the level of brutality and humanity we saw from Hamas this weekend is not just heartbreaking, it's intolerable. We're talking about going after innocents, women's and children, and that we stand with the victims and we stand with Israel. Is that the proper response from our leaders?
I think that it is. I think it is for the governor of Maryland. I think it's an appropriate response. I think it acknowledges the tragedy that we've witnessed and that the people of Israel are witnessing. And I think to be able to, especially given the fact that we have so many Jewish residents in Maryland and in Montgomery County, to be able to have that affirmation so that they know we as a community are standing together with them.
Mark, according to WJLA Channel 7, Montgomery County is home to one of the highest Jewish population densities in the country, with 10% of the county being Jewish and home to 45% of all Jewish people here in Maryland. The Jewish Community Relations Council of Greater Washington, D.C., and the Anti-Defamation League of Washington has released a blistering email criticizing MCPS Superintendent Munifa McKnight and MCPS over their lack of response to the Hamas recent terrorist attack on civilian Israeli civilians. I suppose that's because of the anti-Semitism we've seen in the school system lately. But is it fair to criticize MCPS on this subject?
Well, I thought that MCPS's response, which was to focus on parents being vigilant about how their kids were using social media, was a little in the weeds and did not reflect the totality of the event, and which clearly affects Jewish students, but also students across the board. I mean, we in Washington have been the subject of the object of terrorist attacks in the past, and we certainly should be concerned about the impact that has on the students in our school system. And I think I would have appreciated if the school system had a little bit broader perspective of the way this could affect students in the system.
I want to add into that because I think it's a challenging time for our schools, but I think it's also important where we recognize, I know that our school system has 170 different countries represented in it. And so when you have that, I think many people would say, gee, I'm not sure a school system should respond to something that's a global affair. And the reality is, because of the makeup of our community, I think it's important for us to acknowledge that and recognize those world events, because we have so many different people from so many parts of the world that are located here that you kind of have to step up above that and take that more holistic approach. So I agree with you, Mark. I think it's important to step back and acknowledge who our school here and who our residents are.
And I appreciate all of those sentiments, but one thing that I found rather interesting. On Wednesday, County Executive Mark Elrich announced additional funding for security around synagogues and churches and others. But at the same time, he did not come out and condemn the Hamas attack. He just said that it was a horrifying event and he couldn't understand people being inhumane to one another. Is that a strong enough statement from our county executive?
I don't think it is. I mean, I think I think people have struggled with how to respond in certain respects, especially in a very diverse population like ours. But the reality is that Hamas is a terrorist organization. And I think to call that out specifically and denounce them and denounce that activity is fair and reasonable and expected, quite honestly, in our community. And I think you need to do that. At the same time, obviously, there are, I just checked the news wires before we got on here, and 1.1 million people are being told to leave Gaza. I think we also have to acknowledge that there is humanity there as well, and that has to be addressed. That's separate from Hamas, but that's also as a result of the Hamas actions. And so I think it's important for us, especially in our community, to take a strong stance against terrorism and against Hamas, especially going after as many of the residents that are affecting our community as it is.
Well, we need clarity on the situation in Gaza as well. I mean, Hamas has its headquarters in the largest hospital in Gaza City. So there's no separation between the Hamas as the terrorist organization and the people and the civilians of Gaza, because Hamas has deliberately integrated themselves within those communities. So it's a terrible situation.
The Gaza residents are also hostages in many respects to Hamas.